For example, let's say you say, you know what, I'm going to meet you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And tomorrow you wake up at 11.
Okay.
It wasn't in your control. So if God doesn't make your will into reality, your will is not manifest into reality. Yeah? You could not meet. So when you said...
If something happens in your life, like let's say something bad happens in your life, would you blame it on God or would you blame it on you?
Sure. We would never blame in God. Why?
It's like
Because
because there's like two different types of how people think. There's internal and external locus of control. So if you're internal, you will take responsibility for your action. If something happens to you, you can say, yes, it's my fault. Like it's because of my action that this happened. And there's some people who are like, actually, it's out of my control. Like this happened, it's out of my control. Like God wanted it to happen. Like what type of person are you? Do you take responsibility for your actions, or would you just be like, yeah, it's just because God wanted it?
Yeah. As Muslims, we take responsibility for our actions, the good actions and the bad actions. We don't ever, and we should never blame God, because certain things can happen with the will of God as a test.
Yeah.
So God tells us clearly, like, do you think He created you and He's going to leave you like this without testing you?
Yeah.
He will test you, see whether you are in good in actions or not, because He created you for a reason. That's what I was getting at.
Yeah.
And that reason is to worship, to glorify, to thank, to praise, show gratitude to God. Because in that depends on our future abode, whether it's going to be a life of eternal happiness and joy and tranquility, or it's going to be a life of misery and suffering, pain, and so on and so forth. We can make the destination based on our belief and our actions. So God, often in our life, He wants to make us develop and progress in this journey of ours, and He will test us and see whether you are patient and whether you're grateful and thankful or not. Okay? So constantly there will be either from a loss of life, of wealth, of crops, certain things here and there. God says in the Quran, it's just to test certain people. Aren't certain people, as you are alluding to, they just say, I can't take it anymore. Why is my son dead? And doctors couldn't save him, and they disbelieve in the Creator. So that shows their faith that they're supposed to have had on solid foundation was so weak. They are not even grateful that God gave them all of this and He can take life like He gave life. God is the one who's given us life, and He will be able to take it. So why are we then saying, oh, God's taking the life? It wasn't in ours to begin with. To give an example, suppose I died as a child, would you think my parents would have the ability and the power to give me life again?
No.
So they did not have the ability to give me life in the first place then. Because if they did, they can give me life again and again every time I die. So the life itself is not something that our parents give. It's not something Mother Nature gave them. God, our Creator, Originator, gave us life. And He made us not to live forever in this life. Do you think anyone lives forever? Animals? So there's a program. I'm sure you know about that. There's a program in our cells in which we're supposed to die. So apoptosis, programmed cell death. Yeah.
Would there be people living till they're 500?
Yeah. So people are trying all their best to not to age and to live forever. There's a whole science to do that. They try to preserve their body by cryogenics and so on and so forth. But still, they're not being successful. So the death was there for a reason, so that within this lifespan, we can fulfill our purpose in a life. So when I talked about the Creator, the Originator, we are sure, you're positive? Definitely there is a Creator, there is an Originator, right? And the Originator must have created us for a reason. So if that reason is to worship our Creator, how are we going to worship Him? How are we going to be grateful to Him? Imagine you love someone so dearly and you want to thank them and express your love to them. And are you going to, how are you going to do that? How are you going to do that?
Well, some people in religion, they pray, some people go to church, some people go to mosque. There's different ways people do it, and different religions do it in different ways. But I also think that, for example, a lot of people, I'll take Christianity for a second because I'm a Christian. A lot of people, for example, Christians will go to church on Sundays, but if a Christian doesn't go to church on a Sunday, people are like, oh, you don't worship your God, are you a true Christian, blah, blah. But I think actually in every single religion, like, you you don't specifically have to go to a church or a mosque or whatever to worship your God. I think that you could do it at home. Like everyone can express like their love to God in different ways, and it doesn't have to be going to a symbolic place, like being in your room or whatever. Like everyone can do it in a different place, and I think that there's not only one way to do it, you know. And I think a lot of people get criticized for that.
I agree with you partially, and I will tell you what part I agree and what part I disagree, and then perhaps you can tell me whether, why do you disagree with some of the parts. But the point I was making about how do I express my love, my praise to someone. Imagine he wants to express love to someone, right? Let's not identify what it is. Someone you love so dearly, and you love football so much, and you said, you know what, I'm going to, my boots that I have, football boots that I have played every single match and I've won, so precious and so dear to me. I know it's smelly, I know it's filthy, I know it's now, different parts of here and there it's breaking apart. I'm going to give this to my dearest person. But your dearest person doesn't like football. Every time I tell you on, oh, now look at this, I have to bear this. Doesn't appreciate football, but you do. And he said, there you go, opens up the present, and it's a football. They might understand that, what you're coming from, but if you think about her perspective, you'd say, you haven't made the right choice. Why? You should have asked, or you should have even inquired, what does she like? And appreciate. So when we talk about worshiping God, thanking God, glorifying God, we need to be sure what God accepts. Imagine some people, it's so disgusting example, so I apologize from the very outset. Channel 4 aired this many years ago, maybe a decade ago, I still remember it vividly. There are some gurus in a Hindu tradition, they were baking their own feces and eating it as an expression of love to God. Do you think, in a reasonable mind, that God appreciates people baking their own feces and eating?
How will you know what God appreciates and what God doesn't appreciate?
Good, very good question. That means we need to know, right? We can't not to.
You will never know.
Yeah. We can only know if God tells us what He appreciates.
But God cannot tell you because He's up there.
Let's discuss this matter. Would God not communicate to His creation what He wants from us, why He created us? Would that not be expected of God to do? Or do you think God would leave people in confusion, where people make their own destiny into, okay, I think God wants me to just smoke a cigar and be happy and that's it. And some people say, no, God wants me to enjoy my life, go around girls and boys and drugs and rock and roll, kill, doesn't matter as long as it makes me happy. Who cares about consent? Who cares about harm? It makes me happy. That's the way I'm going to express my love to God. So God, we know, is not going to leave us in this confusion. A God who is all-wise, who's given us knowledge and wisdom in our lives, it makes sense that God would communicate to us in terms of what is expected of us. And we say, this is the form of communication God, our originator, throughout times, over history, different places, has communicated to the people by appointing a spokesperson. They're called prophets and messengers or warners, telling them to convey to the people, this is your purpose in life, this is who I am, and this is what is expected of you. If you do this, this is the consequence. If you do that, that is the consequence. You would say, that makes sense and that is fair. Because someone tells you, imagine now, standing here, police comes and arrests us and say, you know what? We have to put you to a prison, maximum security prison, minimum 12 years. And you say, for what? Because you're speaking here in public. You will be questioning, since when was there a crime? I didn't know. I had no news, nothing. No one told me. I haven't heard anything from anywhere. No police ever told me. You'd be questioning. You would say, that's not fair, putting me in prison just like that. Because any punishment to come, you need to have a pre-warning about it, like, okay, this is what the punishment is going to be for that crime. That's a fair thing to do. So God, to punish us for not doing something or doing something, it would not seem to be fair unless we know exactly what is required of us. Okay. Do you follow so far?
I follow.
Yeah, so this is what we're saying. To know how to worship God, it's not what I make of how I think I should worship God. It's when the Creator tells me, this is how I'm going to accept your worship.
Yeah, but you're saying the the Creator is going to tell you how to worship Him, but if you can't technically communicate.
Not me personally. The
Okay.
Creator will,
I'm
and as He sent or raised, appointed human beings to be prophets and messengers, and each of them, they had their evidences as to how God has made them a prophet and a messenger. Because anyone can come along. Imagine someone comes along and says, I am a prophet of God, and he tells me to give your earrings and your money and your phone and your businesses and your house keys and everything. You're going to do that? You're going to say, how are you a prophet of God? What evidence have you got? So we expect something as a matter of evidence or proof from those spokespersons who claim to be prophets of God. When they establish that I am a prophet of God, and you can see there's no reason to disbelieve in me because of the evidence I brought for you, you would then say, now I'm confident to accept what you say, because I now trust you to be a prophet and a messenger of God. When you go to a doctor, you go in trust already, because there's no reason to distrust that he's a... But if you already know there's some fishy thing going on about this surgeon, and you hear from other people that this man or woman didn't even go to a medical school, didn't get a degree, never went and passed his exams, all fake, you will be very suspicious. You would not trust that person, isn't it? So a prophet and messenger is examined like that, their life, their character, and then you say, I now affirm and I accept you are a prophet of God. So if you bring the Quran, and this is an evidence from God that this is His revelation or communication, then I know I can trust this book. And if God says, worship me and don't worship idols, don't worship trees or stars or moons or planets or anything in the creation.
Everything that's written in this book, though?
Okay, very good question. If this book is evidently demonstrated, evidently demonstrated.
How can you be so sure that all of this is true?
Very good question. And this is exactly the nature of the Quran demonstrating itself to be true.
Because some of it might be a lie, and like during centuries things may change and people might add stuff, take away things. How do you know that this is actually like facts, you know?
Yeah, this is a very good point. So let's talk about firstly, how do we know it's changed or not changed, right? So the Quran has been transmitted from the first person that was given to the Prophet, 1444, 5 years ago. It's about 1400 years ago.
Yeah.
It was transmitted through memorization as well as in written form. We now have manuscripts from within 100 years of his time. So many manuscripts across the globe, in private hands, in museums. There's one in Birmingham University, right? Birmingham Library. There's one in Oxford. There's one in Cambridge. There's one in Vatican. There's in Russia. Everywhere around, manuscript, because Quran was transcribed and copied in large numbers so that people can have access to everywhere. It wasn't like a certain clergy had in control and they will only preach from there and you just listen and whatever I want to tell you and I have control. It wasn't like. It was in the hands of people. So it was transmitted like this, and you can go back now and look at the Quranic manuscript and you can see, yes, you can read the Quran as you read the Quran today. Yeah?
Do you believe everything written inside?
That's the point I was going to answer. Yes, I do. But how I do that is the mechanism I'm going to share with you.
And you follow everything in this book?
I try all the best. As Muslims, they should. So some people, sometimes we fall short because of our weaknesses. So because of our desires and our shortcomings. But always then we repent to God and say, God, I'm sorry. I will try to mend myself. This is what is expected of us. Because we're not like someone who is, so perfect. We are meant to strive towards perfection. That's the whole idea of our life, our journey. That you try to strive towards perfection, and in doing so, if you fall short, but you admit and confess that you have done something wrong and immediately turn to God, He will say He accepts your repentance because He knows your weaknesses. So the transmission was through memorization as well. So if I were to now tell you that any chapter of the Quran, if I were to read it to you in the Arabic language as this Quran is, and if I make a mistake, you'll find so many people correcting my mistakes. You can go to any mosques, when they read the Quran in their prayers, they 5 times a prayer Muslims pray. The morning prayer, Fajr, Maghrib and Isha, the 3 prayers, they read it aloud, the Quran. If the Imam who's leading the prayer makes some mistakes, so many people from the row, back and so on, even a young child, will correct that mistakes. That's how the Quran is being protected because Quran has been memorized. Do you know how many hundreds and thousands, if not millions of people have memorized the Quran? Word for word, letter for letter, and they don't even speak Arabic. Millions of people, yeah? So at any one time, if you go to Muslim countries, there are special memorization school where they memorize, yeah? So I can bring someone who is a 7-year-old and memorize the whole book. I can't do it now, it's so difficult for me. I tried, right? I'm trying, make supplication for me, but I'm saying you can bring a 7-year-old who memorized the whole Quran. So you can go and trace this back a year before, a decade before, 100 years before, 200, and all the way go back. This is a living tradition. Here, in Germany, in China, in Palestine, anywhere in the world, people have always, in every generation, memorized the whole book. So that's why we can be sure that the Quran that we read today is the Quran that the Prophet left behind. Now, how do I know this Quran, all of it is from God? Because when I examine this book, you can be sure that the Quran has provided certain falsification tests and still stands to that test unfalsified. You see, if a book gives you some test of it, and you can say, if you do this, that's definitely not from God, then he will say it's not from God. To give you one example which you'd appreciate is, do you think a book from the Creator will contain mistakes? Of course not, because he's all knowledgeable. The Quran says so. If that book, this book, the Quran, was from other than God, you will find many discrepancies, many inconsistencies. Well, you have a criteria. If this book has shown some mistakes, discrepancies, contradictions, you will say, I'm sorry, this book is not from God. One criteria, falsification test. Another criteria, the Quran says, if you think this book is not from God, what you have to do is simply produce a chapter likened to it. If you can't do it, go and ask for help from your supporters, your people who can. And this is where the challenge is. Look here. And if you're in doubt about what we have sent down, this Quran, upon our servant, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, then produce a surah. This is a surah, each 114 surah or chapter. Okay. Then produce a surah like thereof, and call upon your witnesses, as I said, supporters, other than Allah, God, if you should be truthful, if your doubt is true, right? But if you don't do it, and you'll never be able to, then fear the fire whose fuel is people and stones prepared for the disbelievers, and give good tidings to those who believe, and to righteous deeds, and do righteous deeds, that there be gardens on which these rivers flow, and so on. So there's a warning and there's a glad tidings for people who believe in it. So the Quran tells you in this, in a very second chapter at the very beginning, if you are doubtful that this is not from God, imitate something like it. Now this is a profound falsification test the Quran offered, and it's still being offered today to falsify it. People keep on trying. The Arabs at that time were masters in the Arabic language. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, they knew he didn't go to school to read and learn, and they knew he couldn't even read and write, let alone compose poetry. So when he brought the Quran with rhymes and rhythms, yet not prose or not poetry, and Quran says bring something like it, you'd expect them to be able to imitate it. You know, you can imitate Shakespeare. ChatGPT can do it. Yeah, you can imitate anything in terms of literature, music, and so on. But you cannot do that. I made a video about ChatGPT imitating the Quran, and it admitted he can't do it because of the objective nature of the challenge. Yeah. So if you type in ChatGPT and the Quran, you will see my video coming up, how it is not possible for even artificial intelligence, let alone human beings, to imitate the Quran. Why? Because of the structural construction that the Quran is given. The speech, where you can imagine the speech of the Creator. He made it in such a construction that no one can imitate it. It's difficult to appreciate because literature may not be your forte. But if I were to give an analogy, maybe it can help to understand. You see these kind of building and structures that you see, right? If you are an architect, you are one of the best architects, a good professional civil engineer, architectural engineer, you're the best in town. And somebody says, you can't make a building like mine, you can't make a bridge like mine, and so on. You'd say, why not? What is so difficult about it? Because you should be able to make it. But what if they show you, this is how my building is? It's made of bricks and stones, but each one of the bricks is floating in space and not touching with the other bricks. Imagine the whole structure is like that. Every stone is actually floating with other bricks on left, right, up, down, nothing touching. You can take the brick in and out like that. It's holding the whole structure. You as an architect, can you imitate something like that? You can't. Because you don't think no one has the science and the technology to make something like this, even though it's made of bricks. The Quran, the structure of this language was constructed by the Creator in His speech in such a way, even though it's composed of Arabic letters, alphabet, it cannot be imitated in that composition. That's the challenge of the Quran if people disbelieve it. So once we as Muslims can see in practice people are failing to imitate anything like it, the Muslims can have this confidence to say the Quran is from the Creator. Yeah? Because of how it is demonstrating itself time and time again that it cannot be composed by anything other than the Creator. I'll just give you 2 examples, and there's many other criteria. That's how our confidence in this book is like that I have to trust and take everything. So even though the Quran says like there, God created, the Creator put angels responsible for transcribing what we do, good and bad. Imagine an angel here and an angel there. I can't see the angels, but I would trust, because I know everything else the Creator says, I will say this is the truth, right? There's no reason to doubt about it. So once you know something that is verifiable and you verify it, anything that is of the unseen, you can trust and rely on it. This is a take of the Muslims in which we say Islam is true because it's self-evident of its truthfulness. As a Christian, for example, we don't say Islam came as a different religion. Islam came with the same religion that came with, but because things have changed, people corrupted the message of Christ, corrupted the message of Moses, peace be upon those prophets, and that's why you have people now worshipping Christ instead, or saying God puts a rainbow in the sky because he needs to remember. These are people's corruptions.
Perfect. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate the knowledge.
Yeah? You take care. Okay? You take care. It's all right. It's a different explanation, but it's a sign of respect to a woman when we don't shake hands, and I'm sure you'll appreciate that. Okay? But this is for you, by the way. Take one.
All right, thank you.
Yeah? Take care. Okay? Good day. Thank you. Alaikum salam. Assalamu alaikum.